Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tali Hasanov from WSI Digital Pass. We are a digital marketing agency and we help businesses to build their online presence. I came up with idea of hosting LinkedIn Live interviews after speaking with clients, and sometimes they ask me different questions. So I thought instead of one-on-one, providing value one-on-one, I will bring experts in the field, and they will be able to provide more value to more people. Today, I have a pleasure having with me here Robert Presser. He is a Vice President of Acme Engineering Products, and our topic today is about international market development in the era of COVID. Robert served as the chairman of the board of Defense Construction Canada, a federal crown corporation, providing services for the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. He has an MBA from the University of Western Ontario. He is very knowledgeable, has a really impressive experience and well-rounded. He also writes opinion pieces of the Suburban, and his collection of articles could be accessed at robertpresser.com. And he also writes for Metropolitan. So with a pleasure, I would like to introduce Robert. Robert, the floor is yours. So maybe we can start and you tell us a little bit about yourself and business and what do you do?
Well, it's funny. I find myself running a small international manufacturing business founded by my father and my grandfather, but my education is 2 business degrees, yet I touch engineering every day. I grew up around it, but I wasn't formally educated in it. But you can't be in this business without understanding what you're selling and sometimes designing it. So it's been an interesting transition, even though I've been at it for 28 years full time now. I've gone through 4 recessions, and after each recession, the conditions change every time. We've had product lines that have gone completely off the rails by things that were completely beyond our control. Macroeconomic environments evolve. Governments make decisions that can temporarily depress one of our markets or one of our products. And you really have to be very quick and nimble on your feet. So I've had a real education brought to me by events that are beyond my control in many ways. You know, you say you're the master of your domain. That's great until your domain changes.
Right. I can't agree more with you. That's very true. And considering our challenges with COVID and the recent situations, so who would you say your customers and what locations and markets you work with and you serve?
Well, there's been an important evolution for us. If you look back to the late 2000s, say 2008, 2009, we were very much a North American-centric business. Probably 60% of our business was US-based, 20% was Canada, and 20% was everywhere else. Now we have fingers all over the world. I like to say the sun never sets on the Acme empire. We have a joint venture in India. We actually have more people working for us in India than we do in North America. We have a technology transfer agreement in China, and we're working really around the world. The internet has brought us to every hemisphere, every market. So we make niche market products. We have 3 environmental product lines that deal with air quality, gas detection, with water filtration, water and wastewater and processed liquids. And then we have what is today an environmental product, which is large electric boilers. Why is it environmental? Because it's 0 emissions. So if you're looking for this stuff, there aren't that many businesses in the world that make it. And for sure, these 3 product lines don't exist under another single roof anywhere in the world. So we get to learn from one product line what we experience in a market and can apply it to another. But the challenge is it's a small business, but it's a very complex business. So you're managing a disproportionate amount of complexity and the risks that goes with it relative to the size of our business. And I'd have to say that's the biggest challenge we face.
It's absolutely true that at least internet helps us to connect more easily, especially with number of conferences and online events we have recently. We just spoke about it. So let me ask you this question: do you feel effect of COVID on your business? Is it I see some businesses were affected really badly, while others really become more successful. So what do you see for your business with the COVID?
We did well during COVID, largely generated by our partners in China, with whom we are selling high voltage electrode boilers. But we survived COVID because of work we did years before COVID arrived. What I learned from that 2008-2009 recession was that we were far too concentrated in one market. So in the intervening decade, we really tried to create relationships around the world that would buffer us from a disaster in one particular market. Now, COVID was not an economic recession. It was a health crisis that became an economic recession. And we were fortunate that our business in China with our partner was just ramping up before COVID hit. So that work carried us through COVID. If you look at my traditional North American business, it dropped by at least 30%, which was normal. It was expected. I saw spare parts orders fall apart for us in one of our businesses because when municipalities don't have money, they don't spend money on maintenance. If the building market is soft, you're not selling as much gas detection for new parking garages or facilities. It's normal. But yet we had this other relationship that carried us through. But what I would tell people looking to broaden their geographic reach is you can't do this from one day to the next. You can't say, I'm going to have a soft 3 months, so now let's go export somewhere. It's years and years of work and planning to get to this point. My father started going to China in the early 2000s. I made a dozen trips between 2007 and 2018 before this effort really paid off. So it's an overnight success that took the better part of a decade and a half for us to get through COVID.
You had a good timing that you started long before COVID, right? So a question for businesses that thinking about starting selling internationally, where do they start, and what would you suggest? What your recommendations based on your experience, since you have been doing it for a while now?
I think the first thing you have to do is be honest with yourself. Are you really ready to deal with the complexity of export markets? Are you ready to either adapt the product? Are you ready to spend the time to put the personnel support in place in your business, not only in terms of competence, but in terms of language and cross-cultural sensitivity in order to be effective in these markets? If you've answered yes to those questions, then you have to consider the markets themselves. Just because you have something that's a great seller close to home does not mean it's a great seller somewhere else. And the era of putting a product in a box and just selling it to somebody and washing your hands of it is over. Even if you look at some of the most lucrative markets in the world, like the oil and gas sector in the Middle East, all these countries are now looking for in-country value. ICV is a major issue. So we shifted from looking just for representatives to looking to create partnerships. Partners who understand the local market, and who are prepared to share in the risk with you. That's very important. So you have to be willing to give up some control. You have to be willing to give up a part of your revenue of your product to your local partner who's going to add value in that market, but you will end up having a more enduring presence in that market, and you will probably generate more revenue for your company over time by creating that kind of partnership. But again, it's a long-term process. It does not happen overnight.
Yeah. So this was actually, I was going to ask you the next question. What basically are the weaknesses or maybe pain points of selling internationally? If you need really to have local partnerships and connections before you start, or you basically can build it along the way when you start and then build those relationships and partnerships. So what would be your take on it?
I think it depends on your appetite for risk. If I look at my Indian partners, we started with them in 2012. We executed a few projects together where they acted as suppliers to me. And it was only in 2015 when we created a joint venture to execute projects together within an Indian entity. And then only in 2017 did we buy a plant together. And the important thing is that they matched us dollar for dollar. It's not one of those situations where we put up all the money and then just had faith. So that's the kind of thing you really have to be careful with. And if you don't have an initial appetite for risk, you'll never start. But trust builds over time. And again, getting somebody to share the risk with you is the best confidence builder of all.
True, but before they invest with you, they have to trust you, right? So that's why it takes time. So
it goes both ways.
Right.
There's mutual trust, and there has to be mutual understanding. The one thing I would say is, don't be the first foreign company that somebody works with. Ideally, you're talking to somebody who has already worked with overseas firms and has learned to work with different cultures. You don't want to be the test case for your in-country partner.
Right, right. So let me ask you this question. From your experience, is there a certain service or product you would not recommend to expand internationally? So is there something that you notice maybe that it's not going to work?
You have to have a natural defense of some sort to protect yourself from being copied and somebody running away with the product. If you look at what we make, it's not that it's so difficult to make, but we understand the applications. We know where it works and it doesn't work. And that's the kind of knowledge that you maintain as the foreign partner. So gradually they become accustomed to working with you and they learn something, but we have decades of knowledge. And so this is what you're offering, saying you have an application, this is what's going to work, here's where I did it before, I have a proof of concept. You can put all kinds of agreements in place. The most common question I get is, how do you know you're not going to get copied in China? I said, I don't. But the first person who just tries to copy me or gets a hold of drawings without knowledge, that thing is going to go in and it's not going to work. So this is a natural defense for your product in the market. I think your local partner should be able to defend you. If the local partner is at risk with you, then they are also going to make an effort to make sure that your product cannot be copied and resold or cheapened in any way. You know, everything gets sold around the world. Intellectual services get sold around the world. I think with the right structure, everything can be sold in every market. But it starts with you and understanding really what you have to offer, what the keys to the castle are,
Mm-hmm.
and how you keep those keys in your hands.
Right, right. We speak about once again about values, right? So that's what it is, right? So let me ask you this question: how do you find new customers, or maybe how do they find you currently? What sources of customers? So how would you find them?
Well, in many cases, since we make very niche market products, somebody is searching the internet looking for this stuff because there isn't somebody right around the corner making what we make. So the website is your calling card, but that's all it is. They can download your literature, they can gain a certain degree of confidence, but how you get that customer is the rapidity of your response. I'm sure you, like me, like many others, have filled in a form online on somebody's website, and 3 weeks later, you get a standard email back. Thank you, we've received your request, we'll get back to you, and then nobody gets back to you. You
Maybe.
can't behave that way. You have to respond immediately. So that's the incoming customer. That's the warm lead. For cold leads, I mean, yes, we do trade shows. I've done a lot of virtual trade shows during COVID, but it goes back to something we've discussed before this interview, which is when you're online in a virtual event, people have completed their profiles. It allows you to go shopping for potential customers or potential partners in an export market. And I prefer partners because a customer is probably a single transaction, whereas a partner, you can put the same amount of effort into creating a relationship, but it's a relationship that keeps on paying, which is why I tell people, when you have an opportunity to attend an online event, seminar, trade show, complete your profile as much as possible. Make it easy for you to find people. Plus, the people who have completed their profiles, they also want to be found. So spend some time before the event. If the list of attendees is open, a list of exhibitors is open, and do your homework. Pinpoint who you want to talk to.
Yeah, and those are all great points. It's very true. Sometimes, as you mentioned, after 3 weeks, you filling the form and getting an email. I had experience. Sometimes you don't get any email, right, and nobody contact you,
Very
and
true.
then all of a sudden you get something you already forgot what it was about. And mostly it is automated, not personalized, right? So to your point, people are looking for action right away because you're looking for solution at the moment, right? You have a problem, right? And it should be personalized. Absolutely agree with you. Very true. So looks like you have tried different marketing solutions in the past. What do you think would work the best for your industry in international reach? So we covered some part of it, but what would you say works the best in marketing aspect?
For people who are looking to start exporting into markets that they're not familiar with, sometimes your local customers may be your best entry into some of these markets. In our case, we work very often with the big engineering and procurement contractors. We work with Siemens, we work with Bechtel, we've worked with the large Korean companies like Doosan and Samsung and Hyundai. And these people are active in international markets. And some of my earliest export opportunities were when I was a small piece of a much bigger overseas project. And through that experience, I got introduced to local players in that market to whom I could talk independently afterwards. And when you get introduced to, say, the local UAE or Qatari office of Bechtel or Siemens, they in turn can tell you who are some of the local players that have their confidence for representation of products that they buy from outside, but in those markets. So I got carried along in many cases And then I used what I learned from that project and the contacts I developed from that project to get a warm introduction to some of my earliest export markets.
Okay, you are very organized. I know it's true. So, what would you say are the attributes to the success in doing business internationally? Would you say a certain, this business category, don't try, it's not a good fit? So, is there, if you can combine and let us know what your insights on it?
I still think you can sell pretty much everything anywhere, provided there's some kind of a market opportunity. In other words, you're not going to sell sand to the desert. All right, they have enough of it.
Unless it's a gold sand, so maybe.
That's true, but there are different kinds of sand, and there's different kind of gravel, and sometimes you need a different mix. But it all depends on what your risk profile is as an entrepreneur. How far are you willing to go? How much are you prepared to risk? And let's not forget, you need to get paid. It's the one thing I forgot to mention to this point. All of this is great, but it's not so great if you don't get the money. And look, I've had some miserable experiences, okay? There have been occasions where it has taken me 7, 8 years to collect the last 10% on a contract, because some of these overseas contractors use that as a strategy for making money. You try to come up with all kinds of excuses not to hand over the last 10%, and they figure a lot of people are going to give up. And that's how they make money on the project, by never paying that last portion that was a guarantee of 3 or 4 years or whatnot. And I've had to be very tenacious to get that last chunk of money, which in many cases, that 10% could be a third of your contribution margin on the project. So these are things you have to keep in mind. And there are people to help you. In Canada, we have Export Development Canada. If you need project financing, there's the Business Development Bank. If you need to identify reliable partners, there's the Canadian trade offices all around the world. The same support exists in the United States. When we've exported product that has significant US content, the US trade representative has helped me. There is infrastructure around to help you be successful in foreign markets. You just have to admit that you don't know what you don't know and go get the right help.
So I actually have a question around getting paid. So you mentioned that there were some situations when you had to basically, go after those people and they were not planning to pay the last 10%. Let me ask you this question. So does it mean you didn't have back then good local partners and trusted partners that could help you to collect the money? Or it's regardless of the situation, it might happen to anyone?
It can happen under any conditions. And remember that when you insure a receivable with the Export Development Corporation, you're only insured to 90% anyways. So that last 10% is at risk, whether or not you spent the money to insure the receivable. I had situations where by the time the guarantee period had run out, the client, the contractor I was working with, was in a bad financial state. And I waited until their conditions improved to go after them for the money. So you better be well funded when you do a lot of this work, or you take the job at such high margin that you can afford to take a hit at the end. Because I'll tell you that all over the world, this is the strategy for many of these large consortiums to make money on the projects at the end. They find stuff wrong with your product, whether it's valid or not, and they're counting on wearing you down.
Yeah, it's not very nice, right? So
Part of the
considering
game.
Yeah, part of the game. It's true. It's part of the risk that we spoke about earlier, right?
Correct.
So, considering situation with COVID we have at the moment, right, since last probably year, almost year and a half. So, what is your suggestion how to be competitive and win in B2B space internationally? You find it's more complex and difficult to reach international market because of the COVID, or it's actually easier because more people are open to doing business virtually?
I think there's a bit of both. On the one hand, I think people have become more adept at using technology to build relationships in the same way as we're doing this now. You're where you are, I'm in Montreal, people are watching from all over. So we got used to it from that point of view. On the other side, when you're across the ocean, people have logistical issues, supply chain problems. Also, I'm operating in markets where COVID rears its head again and everything gets shut down for 3 weeks. And you're waiting for 3 purchase orders, but the managing director is at home with COVID and will not sign any new orders for equipment. I faced that a few times already in Europe. So on the one hand, it's easier to create relationships. On the other hand, it can be tougher to close the deal. There's nothing like the commitment of showing your face to an important client and gaining the measure of each other in person. That is still a critical part of business, and I don't think it's going away. So I would say that COVID, if you're well prepared and organized, you can still open doors, but sealing the deal is still more difficult in a COVID environment.
Yeah, it still need to be a personal touch, right, for sealing the deal. I agree. So, since I have last question actually when we're wrapping up. So, what would you advise? What kind of recommendations, final recommendations, would you give to businesses who are looking to expand?
You have to prepare the resources in advance. You have to be honest with yourself and ask if your business is really ready to undertake this task. For us, becoming an exporting business took decades. We started in the US in the 70s. So we gained exposure incrementally. I grew up taking trips with my parents as my father tried to open markets around the world. So it came to me naturally, but not everybody who's looking to export had that kind of organic exposure that I did. But you cannot afford to fail. You cannot afford to fail your first customer overseas. It will ruin your relationship. You have to be prepared internally before you start knocking on doors anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. And prepare it internally. We're speaking about even financing and about
Finance, product, personnel, cultural sensitivity, language skills, infrastructure. It's all in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much for the final advice and for your time today.
Thank
I
you,
hope
Tali.
the information was useful for people who are looking and businesses who are looking to expand. And if anyone has any questions for Robert, reach out. I think Robert will be open for any to help with answers, help anyone with some kind of recommendations. If anyone has questions for me, same thing. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I would be glad to answer any questions. Robert,
Certainly.
thank you so much again for your time today. It was pleasure having you here and chatting with you.
Thank you, Tali.
Thank you for everyone who was watching, and have an amazing day, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.